beat to human history can shuffle off this mortal coil, absolutely certain that he or she has truly lived and seen it with our own eyes, your great power on our behalf. Lord, our ancestors told us about you, how you kept them from disgrace, drove out evil, delivered them from shackles, rescued them from trouble, protected them from hardships, and kept this nation free. We praise you for using our lawmakers for your glory. Accept our thanksgiving as we press toward the future, eager to serve your purposes for our lives in this generation. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, the Senate began a period of morning business at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon. Senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. At 4:30, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the nomination of Richard F. Griffin to be General Counsel for the National Labor Relations Board for a term of 4 years. At 5:30, there will be a cloture vote on the Griffin nomination. I ask consent that the time until 4 p.m. be for debate only.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I welcome the presiding officer back. I hope the presiding officer had a productive week in Vermont and that all my colleagues enjoyed visiting with constituents at home. This work period is going to be 4 weeks long. It's going to go by very quickly, but we have a great deal to accomplish during this 4-week period. We are attempting to work things out so that we don't have to work during the holidays for a change. The last several years we've been stuck right up to Thanksgiving and right through Christmas on a couple of occasions. Now, Mr. President, it's obvious that senators aren't thinking these Monday votes are very important. We have a lot of people not showing up for the Monday night votes. So everyone should understand this vote tonight is a very important vote. I'm disappointed some senators aren't going to be here. But in the future, the next Mondays, be expecting a vote or a series of votes. I think we've become very complacent and not worrying about the Monday night votes. So we're going to have some votes that will be more meaningful, as this one is. And during this next work period, the only time we're going to have off will be November 11th. That's the celebration for Veterans Day. Mr. President, if we're going to finish our work in this 4-week period, we're going to have to work. That means we're going to have to work on Mondays and Fridays. And I hope we don't have to do weekends, but we've got to get this work done. This week we're going to say goodbye to a colleague who was appointed to represent the state of New Jersey after the untimely death of Frank Lautenberg. But we also will welcome a new member to the United States Senate, the Senator-elect from the state of New Jersey, Cory Booker. Mr. President, what a remarkable young man he is. He was a student at Stanford, and you know to get into Stanford you have to be really a good student. But I'm impressed with his academic skills, but he's also a tight end for the football team. And Stanford, you know, is now ranked number 5 in the nation, and they really have a great football program. And Cory Booker, everyone will meet him here. They'll find that he's a very, very big man physically. After graduating with a degree from Stanford in political science, he got his master's degree in sociology from Stanford. He then became a Rhodes Scholar and studied the United States history at Oxford. He received his law degree from Yale. What an outstanding academic record. Stanford, a couple of degrees, Rhodes Scholar, Oxford, Yale Law School. That's really quite impressive. And then he served on the city council and then been mayor for 2 years of Newark and done a job that's been noticed all over the country. I recognize the great work that he's done. During this 4-week period, Mr. President, we're going to do a number of things, not necessarily in this order, but we're going to consider the act that's known as ENDA, Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which would provide basic protections against workplace discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. We haven't taken this up for a number of years, Mr. President. We tried, it failed in the House of Representatives before, but we're going to take it up here again. We're going to consider a bipartisan bill to make compounding drugs safer. As we will recall, there was a terrible tragedy in the Northeast where a number of people died as a result of not compounding these products properly. So this bipartisan legislation will allow us to have safer compounding drugs, and it will also allow us to track prescription medicines from factory to the drugstore. We're going to consider job creation legislation that will build on the economic recovery and strengthen middle-class families. And we're going to take up the defense authorization bill, which supports our troops and ensures this nation does everything in its power to keep America safe from those who would do us harm. But before we debate any of these matters, Mr. President, we must consider a number of vital presidential nominations, including several that have been stalled for more than a year. One of those is somebody that's been wanting to work in the Defense Department. Think about that, Mr. President. Something this vitally important for the Pentagon. And he's been held up for a year on unrelated matters. It's too bad that this has been held up by one Republican senator. So we're going to move forward on this. We're going to do it very quickly. It's no secret that Republicans have systematically slow-walked or blocked scores of President Obama's judicial and executive branch nominations. Pending executive nominations have waited an average of 5 months. Democrats have overcome filibusters of 66 of the President's nominations. And Republicans have blocked or delayed more than that with secret holes and procedural hurdles. As a Senate, we reached an agreement at the first of the year to consider a number of important nominations that have been stalled for months and in far too many cases for years. But obstruction once again has reared its ugly head, and we have a backlog now. It's time to move forward without delay and fill those crucial posts. In the wake of a Republican government shutdown, the nation is watching for a sign the Senate can function efficiently and normally. It's time to show the American people how well and how quickly the Senate can work when cooperation is present. Likewise, Mr. President, our colleagues in the House of Representatives owe the American people, they owe it to them to stop wasting time on political show votes and start legislating. Now, Mr. President, I have enough trouble over here with my schedule here. But I just have to briefly comment on the House schedule. They're going to work until noon on Wednesday, and then they're taking off the next 10 days. From now until the first of the year, they've scheduled 18 days of working. That's enough I'm going to say on that. Our colleagues in the House owe it to the American people to move forward on legislation. On many of the most important issues of the day, Republican leaders have refused to allow the House of Representatives to be heard. Some are allowed to be heard. But Speaker Boehner has a rule that Democrats don't get to participate unless he can first prove there's a majority of the majority to vote on an issue. That's not the way it used to be. We're going to have a celebration here tomorrow on the life of Tom Foley. I had the good fortune of serving with him in the House. He came from a real conservative district in the state of Washington. He served here for many, many years. He was majority leader. He was the speaker. A fine man. And he, like the other leaders that I served with, O'Neill and Wright, what they tried to do, Mr. President, is get 218 votes to pass a measure. They didn't try to get 218 votes from Democrats. They had plenty of Democrats that could have done that. But everyone was allowed to vote. That's the way that it should be now. And it's too bad that it isn't. What has happened over there is the Republican leadership have refused to allow the House of Representatives, the whole House, to work its will. Immigration reform, Mr. President, is one of the most glaring examples of they're not allowing the body to run like it used to. Last June, the Senate passed a common-sense bipartisan bill to fix the broken legal immigration system. It would have strengthened our borders. It would require undocumented people to get right with the law. It would put them on a pathway to citizenship. About 11 million people we're talking about. But for 4 months, 120-plus days, the House of Representatives has failed to act on immigration legislation. If you brought up a bill, a Senate bill or one similar to it, it would pass overwhelmingly over there. Even many mainstream Republicans believe House Republican leaders should allow a vote on the comprehensive plan to mend the broken immigration system. I repeat, if the whole House were allowed to vote, it would pass. The House has also failed to take up the Senate's bipartisan agricultural jobs bill, the farm bill as we call it, a bill that cuts the debt by $23 billion. And it supports 16 million American jobs. They've also refused to bring up something so common sense. The presiding officer, before coming here, was governor of the state of Virginia. I'm sure the presiding officer, just like me, have gone through towns and neighborhoods and those little strip malls, and you see all these places for lease. If we passed here in Congress, as we have done here in the Senate, the so-called Workplace Fairness Act, it would allow these small businesses to get back and rent space. It would allow them to survive. I mean, think at the advantage these online retailers have. They don't have to pay 5–7% of what the others pay. So it's really unfair. These brick-and-mortar places are left to the mercy of these big online folks. Mr. President, when we brought this bill up here, I got a call from one of the major online organizations. And they said, we'll support your legislation if you will put a ceiling that we don't have to do anything until there's $5 million in sales. Mr. President, and that they want $5 million in sales and then pay no sales tax. Pretty good deal. We passed it here, rightfully so, a bipartisan bill. House won't take this up. It's too bad. So on these and other issues, it's time for reasonable Republicans to raise their voice here in the Senate and, of course, in the House of Representatives. There's been a troubling trend over the last 3 years. I've been troubled to watch these so-called mainstream Republicans be marginalized by members of their own party. Now remember, it's not the marginal people that are being marginalized, it's mainstream Republicans. And even more troubling, moderate Republicans have been complicit in allowing this disturbing trend to continue. It's no surprise when Tea Party extremists forced our economy to the brink of disaster or when they shut down the government for the sake of ideological stunts. We saw what happened. But we weren't surprised that the Tea Party did this. But I was surprised that sensible, mainstream Republicans didn't speak up and speak up sooner. And that many didn't speak up at all in defense of reason and responsibility. Think about that, Mr. President. There's 232 Republicans in the House of Representatives. On a vote to open the government after 16 days of being closed and defaulting on the debt, only 85 of the 232 voted to keep the government, to reopen the government and keep us from defaulting on our debt. That is a scary number. So the vast majority of the Republicans in the House wanted to keep the government closed and wanted to default on the debt. Wow, that is something that's spooky. As their more radical colleagues drove the nation and the world to the brink of economic collapse, and most middle-of-the-road Republicans said nothing and did nothing to stop it, was certainly a surprise to me. Although I deplore the behavior of the extremists who sparked this month's manufactured crisis and many of the crises over the past 3 years, I don't blame only them for holding the government and the full faith and credit of the United States hostage. I also blame the so-called mainstream Republican colleagues who remain silent even as these anarchists among us committed political malpractice. They knew better. They should have known better. They know the consequence of default and they know the cost of government shutdown. Yet they allowed members of their own party to take the country down a dangerous road doing irreparable harm to the country and I believe to the Republican Party. As a conference committee sits down to negotiate a long-term budget agreement that sets a course for fiscal responsibility, reasonable, moderate Republicans, mainstream Republicans, must not absent themselves from these discussions. A significant number of radical Republicans have said they would rather risk default than cooperate or compromise with Democrats. Sensible Republicans must not allow these radicals to rule the day. We, Mr. President, Democrats are ready to do the difficult work of finding common ground for the good of our country. We don't expect radical Tea Party Republicans to join us, but we do hope our mainstream Republican colleagues will find their voices, reclaim their party, and work with Democrats to govern once again. Would the chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 4:30 p.m., with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each, and with debate only until 4 p.m.
I would note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. And the Senate in a quorum call. This is their first day back after a week back in their home districts. We, of course, just heard from the Majority Leader, Harry Reid. He talked about the 4:30 time schedule, 4:30 Eastern Time, for debate of Richard Griffin, Jr. for the Council of the National Labor Relations Board. Now, Richard Griffin already served 1.5 years. He was removed because he was a recess appointment, and that appointment came under question. And vote at 5:30 p.m. Eastern to move forward on his nomination. And also, Majority Leader Reid pointed out there are about 4 weeks in the Senate until their next break. He said he was disappointed that some senators weren't there for the Monday votes, said they may need to be in Mondays and Fridays to get all their business done to avoid being in over the holidays. He mentioned some of that work, the employment discrimination bill, defense authorization, regulating compounding companies and their medical pharmaceuticals, and immigration and the Farm Bill. And also welcoming New Jersey's Cory Booker, who will be taking Frank Lautenberg's seat. And here on the floor of the Senate in a quorum call, waiting for lawmakers to come to the floor. Both chambers in session today. The Senate is in general speeches until about 4:30, when they'll turn to the debate and vote to move forward on the nomination of Richard Griffin, Jr. for the National Labor Relations Board General Counsel. Now, Mr. Griffin is a former union lawyer. He was a recess appointment to the board, and he served a year and a half, but a federal appeals court ruled that his appointment was invalid. And over on the other side of the Capitol, the House returns 4 o'clock Eastern Time. They'll be taking up bills dealing with veterans issues, with votes on those in the House after 6:30. And later in the week in the House, they plan to debate 2 bills dealing with financial industry regulation. One would remove regulations on financial swaps, and the other would mandate regulations over broker-dealer conduct. And while we're in this quorum call here on the floor of the Senate, an interview now with the Senate chaplain, Barry Black. We heard from him to open the session today. He's a former Navy Rear Admiral. He talks about the history and the role of the Senate chaplain and some of the questions about the daily prayers that he's delivered recently during the government shutdown. C-SPAN spoke with Chaplain Black on October 16th. That was the day the House and Senate agreed to end the shutdown. Here's a look.
Lord, when our federal shutdown delays payments of death benefits to the families of children dying on faraway battlefields, it's time for our lawmakers to say enough is enough. Cover our shame with the robe of your righteousness. Forgive us, reform us, and make us whole. We pray in your merciful name. Amen. I write my prayer sermon out of the overflow of my devotional life. I read the Bible every day, probably for at least an hour. I read the Bible to prepare sermons. I read the Bible for my personal spiritual growth. And out of the overflow of my devotional life, my prayers emerge. What I get devotionally, I connect to my pastoral interaction with our lawmakers, the members of their family, the members of their staffs, and the other people who make up the Senate side of Capitol Hill. So my prayers consist of a synthesis of devotions and pastoral outreach.
During the shutdown, you used pretty strong language in your prayers, things like save us from the madness, deliver us from hypocrisy, forgive them the blunders they have committed. Were you making a political point when you were saying those things?
I don't think I was attempting to make a political point. I think I was trying to describe the environment that I found myself in. I am a pastor, first and foremost. I'm not a politician. I am descriptive rather than prescriptive. So what I was describing was phenomena that I saw on both sides of the aisle. I think, for instance, I made a statement, remove the burdens of those who are the collateral damage of this federal shutdown. Most of my members were furloughed. I'm aware of the burdens that they have to bear. I made a plea for there not to be a delay in death benefits to the grieving families of our fallen warriors. I did that primarily because I have made scores of death notifications to next of kin as a Navy chaplain for 27 years, and I appreciate the incomprehensible nature of their grief. So I was praying out of pastoral concern rather than trying to make a political point.
Did you feel as though you were giving a voice to some of those people who were furloughed or for military families then?
I think that a critical part of prayer is to lift to God the concerns and the needs of the people you serve. So you are a voice for the voiceless.
And what was the response you got from senators and other lawmakers?
I think someone who may have been upset about some of my prayers would probably be a little reluctant to come to me and say so. So most of the feedback that I received from both sides of the aisle, the feedback was very, very positive. But you have to understand, I see these lawmakers on a regular basis. We participate in a weekly prayer breakfast. We participate in a weekly Bible study. So they know me. They've also been listening to me pray for over 10 years. I mean, 99% of the prayers that have been offered at the convening of the Senate for the last decade have been offered by me. So they know that when I go off script, when I go rogue, they know this must be very important. If you cry wolf in every prayer, when it comes time to say something that is pertinent and urgent, no one's going to believe you. So the pointed nature of my prayers, as I would describe them, rather than the scolding nature of my prayers, I think reflect the fact that most of my prayers are fairly placid. It is only when I am convinced that something urgent needs to be said. And remember, I'm not directing this to the lawmakers. I'm directing it to the sovereign God of the universe. I think they take that very seriously because the scolding aspect is not the normal quality of my praying.
What would your response be to people who say, well, what about separation of church and state?
Well, the phrase separation of church and state first appeared in Thomas Jefferson's 1802 letter to the Danbury Baptists. And if you read the context of that letter, he certainly was not talking about the elimination of a spiritual element to government. On May 25th, 1787, at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, it was Benjamin Franklin who insisted that they have prayer because they were trying to break an impasse. In 1789, when the legislative branch got started, one of their first orders of business was to establish a chaplaincy. So the chaplaincy was established even before the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which states Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The Supreme Court in Marsh v. Chambers, 1983, upheld the constitutionality of legislative prayer. So I think it's pretty clear that our framers intended that there be a spiritual dimension to government, and that the separation of church and state was referring to the establishment of a religion, of having an official state religion or governmental religion. And I don't think any lawmaker would want me to address any particular partisan issue. My position is nonpartisan. Every statement I have made in my intercession could apply to both sides of the aisle. I provide ministry in a political environment, so my prayers will reflect material related to government, because that's what politics is, that's what the political process is all about. But it does not bring up my prayers. I deliberately avoid partisan issues. I've never talked about immigration reform. I've never talked about same-sex marriage or pro-choice or pro-life or anything like that in the decade plus that I've been praying. And I would not be addressing partisan issues. So I pray, as we said earlier, out of the overflow of my devotional life and pastoral outreach, not to bring issues to the fore in my intercession.
What is your favorite part about being chaplain?
My favorite part about being the 62nd chaplain of the United States Senate is that it provides me with a front row seat to human history. There's more written about the legislative branch of government in our Constitution than any other branch. And I have the privilege of having a front row seat to the legislative process. I think that most people are not so much afraid of dying as they are of never having truly lived. And anyone who has a front row seat to human history can shuffle off this mortal coil, absolutely certain that he or she has truly lived.
And a profile there of Barry Black, Senate chaplain, who we heard from, kicked off this session today, of course, with the daily prayer. And both chambers of the House, the Senate, both chambers in today. The Senate is in general speeches until 4:30. At 4:30 Eastern, they're going to move on to debate a nomination. That's a nomination of Richard Griffin, Jr. for the National Labor Relations Board General Counsel. And over on the other side of the Capitol, the House should be back in around 4 o'clock Eastern Time. They're going to be working on bills dealing with veterans issues and votes on those after 6:30. Now, we'll also have 2 hearings scheduled this week, both in the House committees dealing with implementation of the federal health care law. Tomorrow we'll hear from Marilyn Tavner. Now, she's the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. She'll be testifying before the House Ways and Means Committee, and we'll have live coverage at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN 3. And then Wednesday, Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius will be taking questions from members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. It'll be her first appearance since the rollout of the healthcare.gov website that opened on the 1st of October. We'll have that live at 9 a.m. Eastern, and that's also on our companion network, C-SPAN 3. And in a quorum call here on the floor of the Senate, both chambers are in session today. The Senate will be taking up the nomination of Richard Griffin, Jr. at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time for the National Labor Relations Board General Counsel. And over on the House side, returning at 4 p.m. Eastern, taking up bills dealing with veterans issues today. And they'll have votes on those under suspension of the rules after 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Now, earlier today, President Obama officially installed James Comey to lead the FBI. The Associated Press reports the president says it was his sense of right and wrong that led him to pick James Comey for the FBI, not necessarily his education or his professional background. And during the Bush administration, Mr. Comey refused to go along with warrantless wiretapping. He took over last month for Robert Mueller, who stepped down after 12 years as director of the FBI. We also heard more from the White House today during the press briefing, and that was led by Jay Carney.
Wow, everyone. Tough weekend, huh? Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. Hope you had a great weekend. The Red Sox won last night, in case you missed it. Heck of a series. Johnny Gomes. How about that? And Uemara, the whole team. Very exciting for baseball fans everywhere. Saturday's game was not as good. Before I take your questions, a couple of announcements. First off, tomorrow the President will meet with CEOs from the financial, energy, defense, and information technology sectors to discuss cybersecurity and the implementation of the President's Executive Order 13636 on improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. This meeting is part of the administration's ongoing dialogue with the private sector on cybersecurity. Second announcement, and this one's on a different subject. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced major savings for seniors and people with disabilities on Medicare, following measures put in place by the Affordable Care Act to strengthen Medicare by slowing health care costs growth and saving money for Medicare beneficiaries. Next year, premiums and deductibles for Medicare Part B, which covers items like physician's visits, outpatient hospital services, and durable medical equipment, will not increase, seeing zero growth from 2013. In fact, the average growth of Part B premiums over the past 5 years was slower than nearly any other 5-year period in the program's history. And health care spending has grown more slowly in the past few years than it has since the 1960s, half a century. The health care law also reduces the donut hole each year and closes it completely by 2020. Today we learned that since the Affordable Care Act became law, more than 7.1 million seniors and people with disabilities saved $8.3 billion on their prescription drugs in the donut hole, an average of $1,167 per person. And over the last 4 years, the stronger anti-fraud measures put in place by the Affordable Care Act have helped to recover nearly $15 billion for taxpayers. The Affordable Care Act changes that pay hospitals and doctors based on the quality rather than the quantity of care they deliver for patients are beginning to have an effect. For example, hospital readmissions have started to drop after being stuck for years. These lower costs and better care are great news for the trust funds, great news for taxpayers, and really great news for people on Medicare. With that, I will go to your questions. Josh.
Thanks, Jay. There's a report out from the Wall Street Journal that says that the President did not learn until this summer that the NSA had been tapping Angela Merkel's phone for years, as it had been with other world leaders. Was the President kept out of the loop about what the NSA was doing?
Josh, what I can tell you is two things. First, that I'm not going to get into details of internal discussions. But the President clearly feels strongly about making sure that we are not just collecting information because we can, but because we should. And I noted the other day a readout from phone call the President had with Chancellor Merkel made clear that we do not and will not monitor the Chancellor's communications. More broadly, I think it is worth stepping back and looking at a couple of things. Today's world is highly interconnected, and the flow of large amounts of data is unprecedented. There are communications methods that we hadn't even conceived of 10 years ago that we are adapting to, and we know innovation is going to continue. If we're going to keep our citizens and our allies safe, we have to continue to stay ahead of these changes, and that's what our intelligence community has been doing extraordinarily well. These capabilities are part of the reason we've been able to foil numerous terrorist plots and adapt to a post-9/11 security environment. At the same time, with new capabilities, we recognize that there need to be additional constraints on how we gather and use intelligence. And it's in the context of this dynamic technology environment that the President has directed us to review our surveillance capabilities. We've talked a little bit about this, and the President certainly has, but it's good in the context of some of the stories that we've seen of late to remember that the President called for a review earlier in this summer. This review is being led by the White House, and it includes agencies from across the government. There are also important efforts underway that will enable others to review how we strike the right balance, including the Review Group on Intelligence and Communications Technology and the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. Our review is looking across the board at our intelligence gathering to ensure that as we gather intelligence, we are properly accounting for both the security of our citizens and our allies and the privacy concerns shared by Americans and citizens around the world. We also need to ensure that our intelligence resources are most effectively supporting our foreign policy and national security objectives, that we are more effectively weighing the risks and rewards of our activities. And that includes ensuring that we are focused above all on threats to the American people. Once again, as you've heard the President say, we need to ensure that we are collecting information not just because we can, but because we should, because we need it for our security. So, again, I won't go on too long, but I think that it's important to contextualize some of these revelations, to look at what the administration is doing, to review our intelligence activities, and to look at how we balance the need for security in this completely transformed world that we live in because of the technology advances that have occurred, and then against, as I said earlier, the clear and real privacy concerns that Americans and people around the world share.
You just mentioned that it's important for us to make sure that our intelligence gathering above all is about protecting American security, and you and the President in the past have talked about the NSA really being focused on things like terrorism, proliferation of WMDs. Can you assure our allies that the U.S. is not using the NSA's intelligence capabilities to promote American economic interests?
We do not use our intelligence capabilities for that purpose. We use it for security purposes, first of all. And second of all, it's very important to recall, too, that we have extraordinarily strong and important intelligence and security relationships with our allies, and that those relationships are vital to help keep Americans safe, to help keep Americans safe abroad, and to help keep our allies safe. And that kind of relationship, those kinds of relationships are key to the security of this nation and of our allies. So again, we're conducting a review. We are mindful that some of these disclosures have caused tension in our relationships. We deal with those issues through diplomatic channels, and we are in direct communication with a number of countries on these matters. The President is very serious about, as you heard him say in August, about ensuring that this review take place, that we strike that balance, that we remember that our intelligence services and the people in them do extraordinary work to keep us safe every day, and that we're one attack away from assessments about what went wrong in our intelligence capabilities and collection. So we need to remember that the gathering occurs for a purpose, and that's why the review has to look at that issue that the President has identified, that just because we've made these extraordinary technological advances that give us greater capacities, we need to make sure that we're collecting intelligence in a way that advances our security needs, and that we don't just do it because we can.
And Jay, on Saturday, Secretary Sebelius held up the Data Services Hub as an example of what was working well with healthcare.gov. On Sunday, the Data Hub crashed and took down the entire enrollment functionality with it. With new major technical problems continuing to emerge, how should Americans be confident that these problems will be fixed, as you said, by the end of November?
Josh, as you know, Verizon Terramark successfully resolved the issue with the networking component overnight, and as of 7 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, the Data Services Hub was fully operational. The healthcare.gov technical team continued troubleshooting the issue with the online creation account process or account creation process in the application, and has now opened the online application and enrollment tools back up to consumers. So this was the host for the site that had troubles that led to the site shutting down. It is now up and running again.
But if there are new problems that are emerging, separate from what we had already learned about in the first few weeks, doesn't that make it more likely that this all won't be able to be resolved in the timeline you set forward?
Look, we have several teams, many teams of highly highly qualified experts who are addressing the identified and isolated problems that do exist and have existed with the website, and they are fixing them incrementally, as Jeff Zients and others have talked about. That work continues, and the improvements are happening every day, and the consumer experience on the website will continue to improve every day, incrementally, as those changes are made. More changes have taken place that make the website more efficient and effective for consumers as we speak. The separate issue of essentially the company that hosts the site having a trouble that caused it to shut down is not linked to the troubles that we are identifying and isolating and working on and fixing. So we're glad to see that the site is up and running, that the issues have been resolved, and we're obviously continuing the work of making improvements to the site as we make it more apparent to Americans across the country that there are 4 ways for them to get information, 4 ways for them to sign up, and 4 ways for them to enroll, and that's in addition to online, by phone, in person, and by mail. So, this is work, as we've said, that comes about because the website from October 1st on has not functioned at a level that meets the President's standards, has not functioned at the level that would meet the Secretary's standards, and therefore we have taken all these efforts to make the necessary improvements so that we can improve this experience. What's important to remember, too, however, is that from day one, Americans have been able to get information, Americans have been able to sign up, and they have been able to enroll. Because in the end, this isn't about a website, it's about making sure that millions of Americans have access to affordable health insurance, many of them for the first time. Yes?
The report that Josh mentioned, citing officials, made it sound as if the program had been underway for a number of years, and that when the President learned about it, he ordered it stopped. Does the President continue to have full confidence in General Alexander to administer security?
The President has full confidence in General Alexander and the leadership at the NSA and in the rank and file at the NSA, who do extraordinary work on behalf of every American citizen and on behalf of our allies in keeping them safe. The issues that are part of the review look at how we can better balance our security needs and the security needs of our allies against the real privacy concerns that we all share. And as I noted at the top, there has been extraordinary change, technological change, in the last 10, 20 years, but certainly in the last 10 or so years since 9/11 that has affected, I mean, the whole world in the way that we transmit and gather information, and that has brought about changes in the way and developments in the way that we gather intelligence. It's obviously brought about changes in the way that those in the world who want to do harm to Americans and do harm to our allies operate. So that has meant that we've had to adapt. And as we've adapted, and as we adapt, we need to make sure, as the President is insisting, that we are keeping a balance that protects our security and takes into account our real privacy concerns.
As I'm sure I don't have to tell you, revelations of this eavesdropping or alleged eavesdropping have caused damage with our allies. When would you expect the reviews that you talked about to be done, and would you expect them to include any scaling back of monitoring of phone conversations by our friends?
The entire review that is being led by the White House will be completed by the end of the year. There are other efforts, as you know, underway by the Review Group on Intelligence and Communications Technology, as well as the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. In tandem, the President also announced that the administration will work with Congress to pursue appropriate reforms of Section 215 of the Patriot Act. And after having a dialogue with members of Congress and civil libertarians, the President believes that there are steps that can be taken to give the American people confidence that there are additional safeguards against abuse of these programs. For example, steps could be taken to put in place greater oversight, greater transparency, as well as constraints on the use of this authority. The administration is also working with Congress to improve the public's confidence in the oversight conducted by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Moreover, the President has directed the intelligence community to make public as much information about these programs as possible, mindful of the fact that these are very sensitive security programs. The administration has declassified unprecedented information about the activities of the NSA, and we are continuing to do so. So there are a number of efforts underway that are designed to increase transparency, to work with Congress to look at reforms to the Patriot Act, to look at ways that we can increase oversight and increase constraints on the authorities provided by these programs. Separately, there are ways, there's a review underway that will look at, among other issues, some of the very specific things with regards to intelligence gathering, including matters that deal with heads of state and other governments. So these are all important issues, and you've heard the President talk about them and I think reflect in what he said the fact that they're important in his view and that we need to take these steps. When it comes to the relationship that we have with various allies, this is obviously something that has been of concern, and we are working to address those concerns diplomatically, through diplomatic channels, and also in the way that we're talking about these issues now.
Just follow up. When you say constraints on the use of that authority, what do you mean?
I'm saying that the programs are legal, obviously, through the Patriot Act, but that in these reviews that are underway, the President has talked about the fact that we could take steps, perhaps, to put in place greater oversight and transparency and constraints on the use of this authority. So ways to ensure that the programs both achieve what they were designed to achieve in terms of gathering intelligence that goes to the heart of protecting the United States and our people and our allies, and but does so in a way that strikes a balance when it comes to matters of privacy and the other concerns that we share with Americans and others around the world. Jim.
Jay, back in September in Stockholm, the President said, "I can give assurances to the publics in Europe and around the world that we're not going around snooping at people's emails or listening to their phone calls." Presumably that would include the German Chancellor. Is that statement still operative?
Jim, what the President said was true, and what I can tell you is what I've just said when it comes to the questions about communications involving Chancellor Merkel, the fact that we do not and will not monitor those communications, and the broader fact that we are engaged in a review that will look at that issue and other issues through the lens of making sure that we are focused on using the tools available to us to gather intelligence that we need, not just gather intelligence because we can.
Because earlier in the summer he was sort of making the distinction about U.S. persons.
I think you're conflating a couple of programs when it comes to emails. There are different programs and metadata programs, and
You said we're not listening in on your phone calls, and I can assure you, if you're a U.S. person, we're not listening in on your phone calls. I have the
But
exact quotes.
I'm not sure what question you're asking, because when it comes to matters of Section 215 and Section 202, they're very distinct. When it comes to metadata versus other kinds of collection, they're distinct. So the President, I think, in all that he has said about this issue, not just since the disclosures, but even before them, reflects his commitment to ensuring that we do everything we have to do within the law to keep America safe, and keep Americans safe, and keep our allies safe, and that we do so in a way that reflects the need to find a balance, and that recognizes this sincere security, rather privacy concerns that Americans have and that others have around the world.
And the Wall Street Journal article that has been mentioned in this briefing, the main thrust of it is that the President was unaware that this kind of surveillance was going on of foreign leaders. In the interview that the President gave with, speaking of conflating, I'm going to be grouping a couple of things here, but in the interview with Sanjay Gupta with CNN, the President, Kathleen Sebelius, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, said the President was not aware of the problems with the website before it launched on October 1st. Even back when the IRS was at issue back in May 13th, the targeting of political groups, the President at that time said he learned about that through news reports. Is there a concern in the White House, Jay, is there a concern in the administration that the President is being kept in the dark on some of these issues? And
well, it's certainly true that you've conflated a bunch of very disparate issues. The fact of the matter is that the President believes that the work being done by our intelligence services is important, and that it is focused on, when it comes to the NSA, gathering foreign intelligence that is designed to help keep America safe and Americans safe, as well as our allies. The President has also initiated a review because he believes that we need to look at the fact that the world has changed so much in the last 10 years in terms of the technological innovations that we've seen, and the way that we communicate, and the way our enemies communicate, as well as the capacities and tools that we have available to us when it comes to gathering intelligence, and to basically run a review that looks at all of those issues and ensures two things. One, that our programs are designed to gather the intelligence that we need in order to protect ourselves and our allies, and that we are doing so mindful of the privacy concerns that we all share. So,
but is the President learning about the full scope of, say, the surveillance issues? Obviously, it seems he's learning about the full scope of the
As I said at the top, I'm not going to get into individual reports about specific programs. There are several reviews underway. There's one that's being run by the White House, and when those reviews, and specifically the White House review, is complete, we will be able to share more information with you and provide a little more detail about the decisions that the President will make after the review is completed. And I can say that as this review has been undertaken, some decisions have been made even as the review has been underway and not completed. And those decisions are being made because to improve our intelligence gathering operations in a way that is consistent with the balance the President believes is necessary to strike.
Republican critics are making the case, though, that the President appears to be in the dark about some pretty significant stories that are swirling around this White House.
Republican critics say a lot of things. Jim? John?
Jay, let me try more broadly. Is it conceivable, is it believable that the President would not know about surveillance of a head of state of a close American ally? I mean, does that sound plausible to you?
I like the effort at coming at this in a different way, and the Wall Street Journal probably doesn't appreciate the suggestion that their story is wrong, but I would say simply that we're not going to comment on specific activities reported in the press. We have made clear that the President spoke with Chancellor Merkel and assured her that we do not and will not collect intelligence on her communications. The whole operation, the intelligence gathering operation, is under review by the White House as well as by these other two bodies. And the purpose of those reviews is to look at what we do, to look at the tools and capabilities that we have, to look at how we go about the business of gathering intelligence in support of our security and in support of the security of our allies, and to then assess what we do versus the real privacy concerns that Americans and others share. There's no question that in the world that we live in, that the rapidity of change in our technological capabilities has, created possibilities when it comes to communications by those who would do us harm, as well as capabilities that we and others have when it comes to gathering intelligence that merit periodic review, so we can make sure that we're doing things in a way that reflects the balance the President seeks to strike.
I'm trying to get at this question of what the President should know about or be informed about. If U.S. intelligence is listening in on the phone calls of a close American ally, or if they had been doing such a thing, wouldn't the President expect to be made aware of that? Would that be something that he would want to know about, feel he should know about?
I think you can say safely from what the President has said in recent months about some of these issues that he is keenly interested in reviewing what we do and in working with interested parties to ensure that we are doing it in a way that strikes a balance with the privacy concerns that Americans and others have. The other piece of this that is important to remember is that the work that's being done here saves lives and protects the United States and protects our allies and protects Americans stationed in very dangerous places around the world. So it should not be lost on anyone as we look at these issues, and they're real and the concerns are understandable and merit being taken seriously, that we remember the purpose of these institutions and these programs and the hard work that's done every day by those in the intelligence community who do this work on behalf of the American people.
But when you say something like that, the question that gets asked is, how is it possible that listening in on the phone calls of a close American ally is saving lives?
John, as much as I know you'd like me to respond to questions about specific reported operations, I'm simply not able to do that. What I can tell you is that the reviews that are underway are doing serious work. The White House review is going to be completed by the end of the year, and that even as that work is being done and that review is being conducted, some decisions have been made that reflect the President's desire to find that proper balance. Bill.
So when you say that we don't do it and we won't monitor, you're begging the question about, of course, whether we did. And when you say that we need to do this and it saves lives, you're still begging the question of, do we need to do it the way it's been reported that it's been done, and are we still doing it? Can't you come up with something better?
Bill, what I can tell you is that I doubt there's little question in this room that, or in kitchens and living rooms across the country, that the work done by our intelligence community is done in order to keep the American people safe and to protect our allies and to protect our troops abroad. And that's important work indeed, and it is often work done without recognition necessarily because of the nature of the work, and noticed at times only when something terrible happens. So that's important. So I appreciate the stipulation. The fact of the matter is that I cannot and will not get involved in a colloquy about specific reported operations, past activities or even present activities. These reviews are underway, and we are, as part of that process, endeavoring to make available more information about what the NSA does and about the programs that have been discussed a lot of late. And we're also reviewing these programs because the President believes it's very important that even as they work to keep America and Americans safe, that they do so in a way that reflects the sincere concerns about privacy that Americans have and that our allies have.
You're going to make the reviews public?
We will make the information public that we can make public, and we will be more transparent about this than has ever been the case in history. That is already true. We have released more information about what the NSA does than has ever been released before. So the answer is yes, mindful of the fact that we're talking about very sensitive programs that are secret for a reason, or elements of which are secret for a reason.
And have you got anything on the EU meeting?
Yeah. I got anything? John Christopher, you stole your thunder. Didn't think somebody else would be asking about the EU meetings. A group of visiting EU parliamentarians will be in Washington early this week and will meet with officials from the Departments of State, Commerce, Treasury, Homeland Security, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and the National Security Staff. These meetings are part of an ongoing U.S.-EU discussion of privacy issues. So these are... look, we have been, I think, very forthright in acknowledging the tensions that these disclosures have caused. The President's talked about it, Secretary of State has talked about it, National Security Advisors and others have talked about it, I've talked about it, and we are in discussions directly, as these meetings reflect, with countries that have been the subject of some of these disclosures because we take their concerns seriously.
You're admitting that there have been disclosures, but you won't talk about the disclosures.
Well, that's not necessarily the case, depending on the question that you're asking. But you also didn't note that what I'm saying is we're acknowledging the tension that this has caused. We understand that this has caused concern in countries that represent some of our closest relationships internationally, and we are working to allay those concerns and to discuss these issues, and will continue to do so because those relationships are so important for so many reasons, including for security reasons.
Ed. If I could switch to healthcare, online right now, people are reacting to the top of the briefing by saying that when they log on to states who handle their own insurance exchanges, they are seeing an improvement in their ability to log on to healthcare.gov. But in states who go through the federal exchange, they're getting this sign that says the system is down as you speak. So how can you say at 7 a.m. this morning it was all back up and running? How can people out there be confident?
Well, obviously I'm not online right now, Ed, or with people who are emailing you, but what Verizon Terramark has announced is that they successfully resolved the issue with the networking component overnight, and as of 7 a.m., the Data Services Hub was fully operational. Well, I'm sure the people who are working, well, I didn't say that. I said that I'm sure the people who are working on this issue are addressing the kind of question you just raised, if in fact that's the case. I think more broadly, we have acknowledged that healthcare.gov has not performed adequately, and the President is not happy about that. Secretary Sebelius is not happy about that, and that is why we have dedicated these focused resources to fixing the existing problems and getting that site operating at a level that will allow millions of Americans to have the kind of user experience they deserve and need to have online when they're shopping for affordable health insurance and enrolling in affordable health insurance plans, because that is the purpose here. The purpose here is not to build the best possible website. The purpose of the website and the call-in centers and the in-person centers is to provide information to Americans about the health care choices available to them, health care choices that were not available prior to the passage of the Affordable Care Act.
On your point, beyond the website, President, when he was trying to get the law passed, repeatedly said, if you currently have health insurance, you'll be able to keep your plan. This morning, David Axelrod was pressed on that point and said the majority, the vast majority, will get to keep their plans. He no longer works at the White House. From that podium, will you admit that when the President said, if you have a plan, you'll get to keep it, that was not true?
Well, let's be clear. What the President said and what everybody said all along is that there are going to be changes brought about by the Affordable Care Act that create minimum standards of coverage, minimum services that every insurance plan has to provide, so that an individual shopping for insurance, when he or she purchases that insurance, knows that maternity care is covered, that preventive services are covered, that mental health services are covered, that the insurance policy you buy doesn't have an annual limit or a lifetime limit, that there are out-of-pocket expenses capped at a maximum level, both annually and for a lifetime. So it's true that there are existing health care plans on the individual market that don't meet those minimum standards and therefore do not qualify for the Affordable Care Act. There are some that can be grandfathered if people want to keep insurance that's substandard. But what is also true is that all Americans who have insurance on the existing individual market will now have numerous options available to them, and 6 out of 10 will pay less than $100 per month in premiums for better insurance. It's not even an apples-and-apples comparison. This is qualitatively better insurance coverage than what was available in many cases to Americans around the country in an area of the insurance market, by the way, that was so lightly regulated that you often didn't know what you were getting. So you could sign an insurance policy, get that plan, pay a lot of upfront money, premiums, out-of-pocket expenses, and then find out that because of the fine print, it doesn't cover the actual condition that you have. That will no longer be the case. So I get what the effort here is, but the fact is that
well, the President said one thing, and you're admitting that that's not going to be the case, that not everyone's going to keep their plan. They will admittedly wind up probably with better insurance in the long run, and so they may be healthier. That should be said. But the President sold it as, if you have a plan, you'll get to keep it, and that's not true.
Ed, I appreciate what you're trying to do. 80+% of the American people already get insurance through their employer, through Medicare, through Medicaid. They don't have to worry about or do or change anything. Those remaining individuals who do not have insurance at all now will have it available to them through, or don't have insurance at all or get it through the individual market, will now have insurance available to them through expanded Medicaid services in those states that have accepted the expanded Medicaid program, as well as through the healthcare marketplaces. And it's correct. I mean, I take your point. It's correct that substandard plans that don't provide minimum services, that have a lot of fine print that leaves consumers in the lurch often because of annual caps or lifetime caps or carve-outs for some pre-existing conditions, those are no longer allowed because the Affordable Care Act is built on the premise that health care is not a privilege, it's a right, and there should be minimum standards for the plans available to Americans across the country.
The last one, there was a woman on CBS this morning when you say it's substandard and now people will be, it'll be better for them from a cost standpoint. 56-year-old woman in Florida on CBS this morning said she was paying $50 a month for health insurance. Now it's going to be $500 a month. And she said, quote, what I have right now is what I'm happy with. I just want to know why I can't keep what I have. Why do I have to be forced into something else? What's your response to that woman?
Again, individual cases, I cannot address. I don't know that woman's particular circumstance. What is true is that subsidies are available to individuals that are not necessarily reflected if they just look at premium prices. Remember, even before the Affordable Care Act was rolled out on October 1st, premiums were published that were the level set prior to what you would be paying if you received a subsidy, and nearly 50% of the people we're talking about here would qualify for a subsidy. Secondly, again, I don't know the individual experience, but the fact of the matter is millions of Americans are going to have available to them insurance coverage that they have never had, and quality insurance that they've never had. Insurance coverage that does not either contain within it caps on your on your annual expenses that you missed in the small print, or caps on your lifetime expenses, or that covers mental health services rather than refuses to cover it, or provides, doesn't charge women double, which has also often been the case, and provides maternity coverage as a basic element of even the lowest level plans under the Affordable Care Act. So, I think that we're going about the business of making sure that the information is available to millions of Americans across the country who have clearly expressed an interest in the fact that this coverage is available to them. And we're going to work day by day to improve access to that information through the online site and through the other means available to Americans because this is so important that Americans have this insurance available to them. Yes?
Jay, what percentage of individuals on the individual market will, in fact, lose their plan or have to change or find a new plan?
For that kind of question, I encourage you to participate in the regular briefings held at CMS. Again, I think that insurance companies that have existing products that do not meet minimum standards obviously cannot, those products are not, they don't fit under the Affordable Care Act anymore. There's a minimum level of insurance coverage that is part of even the most basic plans under the Affordable Care Act. Those insurance companies, and I think you've seen some executives speak about this from the various insurance companies, are providing plans, similar plans with the additional coverage, basic coverage, but without the cap on lifetime expenses or annual expenses, without some of the other onerous aspects of plans in the individual market that are now available to those folks who want to have insurance through the same provider that they have. Otherwise, obviously, people can shop and find an even better deal, potentially, if they qualify for subsidies, or higher levels of coverage on a bronze, silver, gold, or platinum plan.
So does the White House concede that there are winners and losers in this plan, including one individual we spoke to in North Carolina whose family, to keep the closest similar plan to the one they have now, will pay 430% more than their present plan?
Again, I don't have specifics from your networks. Peter, what I can tell you is that overwhelmingly people are going to have affordable health care available to them that wasn't available before. And I understand that there are existing plans that are so bare bones. They don't provide adequate coverage. They may have enormous premiums. They may have carve-outs for pre-existing conditions. They may have lifetime and annual caps that their purchasers don't even know about until they get the bill. So it is not a fair comparison to compare those kinds of plans, which were part of the problem, to the basic level insurance that's provided under the Affordable Care Act.
A couple questions given the NSA story right now. Is the President still using his BlackBerry?
I have no change to announce in terms of the President's communications.
So since he fought so hard to keep it when he became President in 2009, I guess I'm curious if there have been any changes made in terms of the precautions in place, the protections being taken right now to protect him from being surveilled by some other country.
So you're asking me about security precautions taken to protect the President's communications from foreign surveillance?
I'm not asking for his phone number. I'm just saying that you say the intelligence gathering process has changed over time, which has enabled us to keep up with it as we surveil foreign nations for information. So have we done things over the course of that time, adding precautions to protect the President's own phone?
I would address that question to the Secret Service. Margaret.
Thank you. Has President Obama ever signed a finding requesting surveillance of a foreign leader or otherwise tasked the intelligence community to provide intelligence on foreign communications?
I have no information to provide about specific reported intelligence activities. I can recite some of the answers I gave to prior questions, but you probably don't want me to do that.
I'll keep going. I had a couple others. I'll just take your time. Has the President's PDF ever contained any information about those activities since President Obama took office?
I think you mean PDB, and I think you mean the highly classified sensitive document that and briefing that I won't, that might come in PDF form, but...
If there was surveillance of a...
Might be served with PB&J. Okay, that's good.
If there were surveillance of at least 35 world leaders, can you tell us when he instructed that it stop against Chancellor Merkel, and it also stop against the other foreign leaders?
Again, Margaret, I can speak to the specific issue of Germany and the Chancellor because of the conversation they had that I read out and the assurances the President made to Chancellor Merkel, but I don't have anything more for you on specific reports about intelligence activities with regards to heads of state or other matters. These are issues, broadly speaking, that are under review, and as that review continues and comes to its conclusion at the end of the year, even as it continues, there are decisions that are being made with regard to how we conduct our intelligence activities, and I'm sure more will be made as time goes on. And then when the review is concluded and the President has made some assessments, then we'll provide as much information as we can about that and those decisions when we can.
I understand you can't talk in detail, but I just want to make sure that we're all square on the same question. So the journal story suggests that the president didn't know about it until he knew about it and then asked it to stop.
I think it's fair to say the president didn't know about it until he knew about it.
Just because he wasn't,
in fact,
just because he wasn't briefed by General Alexander doesn't mean that he didn't know about it. Just to be clear, you're saying that you're not going to answer questions about when the president knew that we were surveilling the
about specific operations that have been reported in the press and when the president...
That sounds so vague. I mean, we're actually talking about...
No, I'm saying they're specific. I'm saying that I can't talk about specific intelligence activities reported in the press. I can speak broadly about the issues that surround some of these reports and the review that has been underway in part because of these reports and what the president believes we ought to seek as we do this review and what our goal ought to be in terms of finding the proper balance between the necessary surveillance that we must conduct, like other nations conduct, in order to protect Americans and the nation and our allies, and the privacy concerns that many of us have, understandably, both here and abroad.
But he may very well have known since January 2009 that we tapped Angela Merkel's phone and 35 other people's. You're just not saying yes or no right now because the position is that you're not...
I'm not going to address specific reported information. So, I mean, just imagine, if you will, set aside the specific nature of this report and imagine any other potential true or false intelligence operation that might be reported in the press, and imagine whether or not I or any other official could discuss that openly like this. So I think that the point is that we are very mindful of the concerns that have been raised by, in particular, our allies on some of these issues, and the president has had conversations, and others have had conversations with their counterparts, and those conversations continue through the appropriate diplomatic channels. And then, obviously, when it comes to Germany, we made clear a piece of information as regards the president's conversation with the chancellor. Julia, and then Chris.
Hey, so the president is going to Boston to talk about the Affordable Care Act on Wednesday. Can you talk a little about what he might say that's any different from what he talked about in the Rose Garden, and more broadly?
You trying to decide whether to make the trip, or? It is Wednesday in Boston. I'm just saying.
Exciting, but more broadly, how? Clearly, we know you will be going.
No scheduling announcements to me.
Back to the ACA. Back to the ACA. In terms of more broadly, what the White House is trying to communicate, given that the website isn't fully functional, the call centers are experiencing some problems. Is there anything that you're trying to communicate now that we have this understanding that you expect everything to be working smoothly by the end of November as opposed to in the next few weeks?
Well, I think when you say everything, I think we're being very specific about what we're talking about, and that refers to the website. I don't want to preview in detail what the president will say in Boston. Obviously, the central points about the importance of the Affordable Care Act and the insurance that will be available to millions of Americans because of it will remain. And while some of us in this room may feel like we've heard it before, millions of Americans out there are eager to find out more information, to hear from the president, hear from others about the fact that come January 1st, this insurance coverage will be available to them. And for many of them, if you're, as I've said in the past, if you're a breast cancer survivor, you're a single mom, and you've been priced out of affordable coverage because of your pre-existing condition, or you are hanging on barely financially because of the extraordinary cost you have to pay because of your pre-existing condition, January 1st is a very important day for you. And that story is replicated across the country in the hundreds of thousands and millions even. So the fundamental issues here don't change. I think Massachusetts is an interesting place to visit because of the Massachusetts experience. As you know, Massachusetts implemented on a state level a program very similar to the Affordable Care Act. It had its own launch difficulties. It had, I think, some notable, when it came to early enrollment issues, the figures are rather extraordinary in terms of what they initially saw. I might have something on this in Massachusetts that is, I think, something worth keeping in mind when we look at the 6-month enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act, and that is, we know from experience that in Massachusetts, enrollment of healthy adults remained low until just before the deadline. In the first month of what was known as Romney Care, 10,000 people signed up for plans with no premium and Medicaid, and only 123 people, premium-paying enrollees, signed up in the first month. So think about that, 10,000 Medicaid, 123 premium-paying enrollees in the first month, and think about that ratio, if you will, and imagine the stories that were probably generated at the time about how the whole thing was going to fail, when in fact the opposite turned out to be true. Chris.
Thanks, Jay. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is announcing right now that he's going to bring up the Employment Non-Discrimination Act for a vote in the Senate before Thanksgiving. In the coming weeks, will we see the President make the same public advocacy agenda that he's done on other initiatives that he supports, like comprehensive immigration reform?
Well, I think you know the President's position on this. He strongly believes that legislation like this needs to be passed, and he wants to sign it. So we are very pleased with the progress we've seen as this legislation has moved in Congress. There's obviously a lot of work still to be done, but he absolutely hopes and expects the Senate to act and pass this legislation, and will encourage continued movement through the Congress.
There are a number of undecided senators on ENDA that on the Democratic side, as of this morning, included Bill Nelson, Mark Pryor, and Joe Manchin. Will the President reach out to these senators to make sure that they would support ENDA when it comes to the floor?
Well, we want every senator to support it. I'm not going to lay out our legislative strategy for you, but it is something the President believes strongly is in the interest of the country to see turned into law. R.A. and then John Christopher.
It looks like the Barack Obama Twitter account was hacked, apparently by the Syrian Free Army. Do you have any response?
I do not. I will take the question. John Christopher.
Since Bill asked our joint question, I'd like to ask a question about Mr. Greenwald. He seems to be holding on to all the documentation that Mr. Snowden has been passing on to him. Is this administration considering any actions against Mr. Greenwald?
I certainly know of none. I would, I don't have anything on that for you. Connie.
First anniversary of Hurricane Sandy. Can you do anything to accelerate aid to the victims? And is there consideration of new building guidelines, especially in vulnerable areas?
I'm glad you mentioned the anniversary, because obviously it seems very long ago to those of us who were fortunate not to live in the path of Sandy, but for those who suffered because of that storm, the recovery effort is ongoing. And what the President made clear from day one is that his administration would stand side by side with the victims of that terrible storm long after media attention shifted elsewhere. And I think that we have demonstrated that commitment throughout the past year, and it's an ongoing commitment. And that includes the provision of aid, as well as numerous other projects underway as part of the administration's work with the affected states, in particular, obviously, New Jersey, in the wake of that terrible storm. April and then John.
Jay, going back to the spy program, when you say the President wants greater oversight constraint, does that oversight mean extending tentacles into congressional oversight as well?
Well, Congress already has a very important role to play when it comes to oversight of the various activities engaged under the sections of the Patriot Act that we've been discussing so often these past several months. So one of the...
don't have enough.
Well, these are issues that I think the President believes ought to be examined and looked at as we try to strike this balance between our very real security needs and our very real privacy concerns. So there's obviously different kinds of oversight. There's executive branch oversight, there's FISA court oversight, and there's congressional oversight. And I think all of these elements of oversight can and will be looked at as part of a review.
Also, when we talk about the NSA spy program, we can't help not to think about Snowden. What's the latest on efforts to bring him back here to the United States to face some sort of punishment, jail time, what?
We continue to hold the position we held, which is that he ought to be returned to the United States to face trial, where he will be accorded all of the rights that are due defendants in our judicial system. And he has been charged with serious crimes here in the United States and ought to return to face those charges. I don't have any new information to provide to you except to say that that our views on this are clear and expressed regularly in our conversations with government officials in Russia. So our position hasn't changed. And we believe that it's important to remember that our system of justice allows for the kind of rights and privileges that are unique in many ways, and especially by historic standards, and that he would be afforded all of those if he were to be returned or to return to the United States.
And my last question. A couple of months ago, I asked you what makes this country different from Russia, especially now as we're seeing more and more information leaked and given out about the fact that there's a vast spy program spying on everyone around the world and including people in this country. The ACLU says what makes us different is our court system. What makes us different in the midst of all of this new information?
Well, I'm sure that folks here don't have the time to listen to me wax poetic about what makes the United States different from many other countries when it comes to civil liberties and when it comes to transparency and when it comes to democratic practices. So I will refrain. But I think that the comparison on in all three of those areas is pretty stark. This very briefing is a reflection of and the kind of questions that are raised here and in response to press reports that might not be able to appear in so many countries around the world, I think are a reflection of our system's democracy and our system's transparency. Now, we grapple with these issues every day, and as a nation, as we should. And we have in this case, at the President's direction, a review underway of intelligence programs and the collection programs with an aim to making sure that we are striking that balance that he thinks is important to strike, and that others do too. He's not unique in believing that, but he does, as Commander-in-Chief, also have a pretty unique insight into the dangers that confront the United States, the dangers that confront our allies, the threats that exist every day and that need to be met by our intelligence community and by our military and by others in our government and by our allies. So that is a pretty heavy piece of business, but it's an important one. And he's, this review is being undertaken at his direction because he thinks it's very serious. John?
Two things.
Last one, John.
Two things, if I can. The first, Senator Graham has said that he will block nominations if more information and witnesses are not made available to talk about Benghazi. I wanted to get your reaction to that and whether the President is doing anything to either meet those demands or get Senator Graham to back off of that threat to block all nominations.
Well, on the issue of nominations, we obviously believe very strongly that the Senate needs to move expeditiously to consider and confirm the many qualified presidential nominees whose nominations are pending. When it comes to oversight and Benghazi, as you know, the administration has made extraordinary efforts to work with seven different congressional committees investigating what happened before, during, and after the Benghazi attacks. That includes testifying at 13 congressional hearings, participating in 40 staff briefings, and providing over 25,000 pages of documents. And just today, there are news accounts that I trust are accurate that the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee collected hours of testimony from State Department employees who were in Libya on the evening of the attacks. Again, that's today. The State Department has worked in good faith to meet the Hill's many requests, and they will continue to review legitimate incoming requests. But let's be clear that some Republicans are choosing to play politics with this for partisan purposes, and we find that unfortunate. What happened in Benghazi was a tragedy. It is absolutely the case that there was not adequate security for the 4 individuals who lost their lives, for the Americans who were there on the ground. It was the task of the Accountability Review Board set up by Secretary Clinton, approved by the President, or with the President's approval, chaired by Ambassador Pickering and Admiral Mullen, to investigate issues, especially around security and the inadequacy of the security at the facilities in Benghazi, and to recommend steps that needed to be taken so that we can focus on the principal goal here, which is to ensure that adequate security is provided around the world where Americans are serving, often in harm's way. When it comes to I think the evident politicizing of Benghazi, it is as unfortunate today as it was, last year and since then.
You said some Republicans are playing politics. Are you saying Senator Graham is?
No, I'm not. I think that in general that has been the case. I'm not. I saw what Senator Graham said. I think it's unfortunate to hold up any nominee or any nomination process. And when it comes to doing so for this reason, I think I've noted the considerable cooperation that the administration has provided on these issues, including, again, if press reports are accurate, the fact that the House Government Oversight and Government Reform Committee collected hours of testimony from State Department employees who were in Libya on the evening of the attacks today. So that cooperation is ongoing.
I know everybody around here has talked about working to fix the website rather than to fix blame, but should the American people expect that a person, a set of people, a contractor, someone will be held accountable for this failure to get the program moving as it was designed to?
I think that you're right that we're focused now on fixing the problems on the website, making the whole structure function as efficiently as possible for the millions of Americans who clearly desire information about their insurance options and who clearly want to enroll in various insurance plans. We're not going to Monday morning quarterback now. There's obviously a lot of time ahead to look back at this process. Right now, we're focused on making it work. I'm not making any statements about what that will look like in the future. Obviously, there's already congressional activity involved in oversight on these matters. We're focused on the goal here. The purpose and the goal was to provide affordable health insurance for millions of Americans who did not have affordable health insurance in the past, and we're continuing to focus on that goal.
The question is, should the same quarterback or the same team start next week?
What I would say to that is we have teams in place who helped build the system and who have obviously great insight into the system. We have added extra eyes and brains to those teams in order to accelerate the process of fixing the problems, and we think that's the right approach because, again, if your goal is to make the website work for the American people as opposed to finding places to affix blame, then the approach we're taking is the right approach, and that's the approach we're taking because we believe that health insurance is something that every American wants. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jay.
Joining us now to continue on a discussion about our health care law and the health care law update. It's our weekly segment here on C-SPAN with Kaiser Health News. Joining us for that discussion, Mary Agnes Carey. She serves as the senior health correspondent. Welcome.
Thank you.
We've heard a lot about the website. What's the latest that we know about the condition of the website?
Well, unfortunately, the subcontractor as part of Verizon that runs the data hub had an outage last night. It's affected the healthcare website. It was still down this morning. I checked before I arrived. So that's yet another woe in the long saga that has dogged healthcare.gov. As we know, there was a congressional hearing last week in the House where key contractors came in, talked about how they had recommended more testing earlier. That was not done. Talked about how at the last minute federal officials decided to turn off a browsing function and require people to make accounts. That created a backlog. A couple more hearings coming up this week, so there's been a lot of attention and focus on this website.
So the outage means that people are unable to use the website, or at least at the time you saw it, they were unable to use the website at all?
What I did is you get the home page, and then I clicked, I wanted to, I have yet been unable to set up an account, thought I'll give that a try, and then got a message that the site was down.
So there's the website there. You'll notice that the smiling girl that was on that website, there was a story about that as well, now missing as well.
Yeah, she's gone, and basically they've replaced it with more information about what to do if you can't get on the website. You can call a 1-800 number, you can print out an application, fill it in, and submit it. But then again, even if you're on the phone, there's been stories about how people at the 800 number are having a problem getting onto the website to put in your information, but they're trying to make it clear to consumers that there's many ways to apply, and also they've made it very clear they're working as hard as they can to fix the site, and said on Friday they think by the end of November it'll function well for most users.
And so they made even changes in leadership about who's taking control as far as Jeffrey Zient's name come up.
Right.
And what's his role? Talk a little bit about what goes on as far as his role in the website.
Well, he's been kind of brought in to be the troubleshooter. He's well known to the White House. He twice was an acting director of the Office of Management and Budget. He was the first chief performance officer ever at the White House. He was brought in to fix something called cash for clunkers. We might remember back in 2009, people were offered financial incentives to buy a more energy efficient car. The demand overwhelmed that program. He was brought in to fix that. So he is the head guy, and also they have elevated the status of a contractor that was part of the program to bring them in to say they will now be the chief contractor, if you will, to do that. And that is the Quality Software Services, Inc., also known as QSSI. So while they were a part of the project, one could say, wait a minute, they're part of the faulty rollout. Why would you elevate them? The thought is to try to bring an entirely new contractor in at this point would be really hard to do. They'd have a lot of time to kind of get up to speed. And let's go with this company. And they also are known for the Federal Data Hub, which is one of the pieces of healthcare.gov that's been working. So they've been elevated in their status.
What did you learn from having the contractors testify about what they did to the website?
That there is a lot of blame to go around. And it kind of became a blame game. The contractors were blaming each other. They were blaming officials at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Members were trying to get more specific information about what happened when. And I can't tell you the clearest lines were drawn, but it was sort of a window into what's ongoing. And again, this week, Marilyn Tavenner, who runs CMS, is going to appear before the House Ways and Means Committee tomorrow. Kathleen Sebelius, who's the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, will be in front of Energy and Commerce on Wednesday. And so I think that this picture, this story, continues to unfold.
So with that in mind, just hold on to that thought for just a second. Just want to invite you into the conversation with Mary Agnes Carey of Kaiser Health News. If you want to call and comment about the Affordable Care Act, ask questions about it, ask questions about the website, we've divided the lines into two lines this morning. If you find yourself amongst the insured, 202-585-3880. If you find yourself uninsured, 202-585-3881. And pick a line that best represents you. You can also tweet us as well at C-SPAN WJ. We'll take those calls in just a moment. Starting with the Secretary Sebelius, what do we expect to hear this week?
Well, I think that this is the same committee, House Energy and Commerce Committee, is the same committee had the contractors in, so I think you can expect a